welcome to everyone who's here so far. We're going to give people a few minutes to join, and then we'll start in a couple of minutes. Okay, one more time. We're just going to give people about another minute, and then we'll kick this off. I'm seeing lots of familiar names in the chat, in the list, which is warming my heart. Lovely to see you all here. Okay, I think we're going to get started because I don't want to waste too much time. So thank you all for being here. My name is Stephen Meswarb. I am the Deputy Director for the ACLU of Colorado. Thrilled to have you all here to at this webinar to meet our new Executive Director, Deborah Richardson. A couple of housekeeping notes first. First, I would like to introduce Luis Gomez from Community Language Co-op, who will be telling you about some language and translation options.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Luis Gomez. I'm here with Community Language Cooperative as a Spanish interpreter. And today we are making a commitment towards language justice. To establish that, we're going to be using a Zoom interpretation feature that allows for simultaneous Spanish interpretation. Once we activate it, you'll see a small globe appear on the bottom right hand of your screen if you're joining us through a computer. If you're joining us through a cell phone, or a tablet, you can select the three dots where it says more, and the interpretation feature will be there. This just allows everyone to be able to participate completely, ask questions, all in the same way, and to be able to do so in the language of their heart, the language that they speak with their family. Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Luis Gómez, estoy aquí con la Cooperativa Comunitaria de Lenguaje como intérprete de español, y hoy vamos a intentar de establecer justicia lingüística utilizando una función de interpretación simultánea a través de Zoom. Ya cuando la activemos, verán la imagen de un pequeño globo terráqueo en la parte de la derecha debajo de su pantalla si se unen por una computadora. Si se unen por un teléfono celular o una tableta, pueden seleccionar los tres puntos donde dice más y ahí encontrarán la función de interpretación. Podrán seleccionar si desean participar en inglés o en español para todos poder participar, hacer preguntas, comunicarnos de la misma manera en el idioma de nuestro corazón, el que hablamos con nuestras familias. Si tienen cualquier pregunta durante la reunión, nos podemos comunicar a través del chat. If you guys have any questions or issues throughout the meeting, we can communicate via the chat. We can now activate the feature, and remember to please select your language. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Luis. So later on toward the end of this hour, we will be having a question and answer session. You will notice that at the bottom of your screen, there are two options. There's the chat and there's a Q&A box. We would greatly prefer if you have questions for Deborah or for Scotty or for any of us here to put that in the Q&A and not the chat. We can try to capture both, but we would prefer the Q&A. So, and with that, before we get started, I wanted to sort of do a few highlights over the last year. We are now at about 1 year since we all went into lockdown. The ACLU Colorado staff has been working from home for almost a year now. And it has been in some ways the most busy year we've ever had. And we're just gonna tell you about a few highlights. Just about a year ago this month, Governor Polis signed a bill that made ACLU of Colorado the 22nd state to repeal the death penalty. It was a huge victory after literally decades of work. In the wake of the protests after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the ensuing protests, ACLU of Colorado and our partners passed SB 217, the Law Enforcement Integrity Act, which was one of the most sweeping police accountability bills in the country and ended qualified immunity for police officers in Colorado. We also filed a lawsuit on behalf of Black Lives Matter 5280 and some individual plaintiffs who were injured by police while protesting the police violence. The 2020 election, not only had Colorado with one of the highest voter turnouts in the country, but we decisively defeated Proposition 115, which would have banned abortion later in pregnancy. Then this winter, we premiered The Facility, which we helped to fund and produce. And The Facility is a short documentary film feature which documents the conditions and the experiences of individuals in the ICE detention facility in Aurora, Colorado. And then in January, we launched our Redemption campaign, which with some players from the Denver Broncos, and the Redemption campaign calls on Governor Polis to use his clemency powers to greatly increase the number of individuals released from prison, medically vulnerable individuals released from prison who are at risk for COVID. So that's just a brief touch on some highlights from this past year. And without further ado, I will now turn this over to our featured panelist today, Maurice Scott, who is the chair of our board of directors, and of course, our wonderful new executive director, Deborah Richardson.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, I would like to just welcome everyone, and we'll go ahead and jump in with questions. Deborah, welcome to you. We're glad to have you finally on board here at the ACLU of Colorado. To start, I was hoping you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Deborah, you're on mute.
Thank you, Scotty. I'm really honored to be a part of the ACU family, in particular the ACLU of Colorado. So many of you may know I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and because of the social location of where I grew up, it really did inform my life. I had the good fortune of living in a community called Collier Heights, which is on the National Historical Register as being one of the few communities that were built by Blacks for Blacks, and also who lived there. In my community, we were 4 doors up the street from Dr. King's parents. Across the street was Donna Hollowell, the NAACP attorney who won the suit to integrate the University of Georgia. So all the adults around me, including my parents, were very much engaged in the American Civil Rights Movement. And my personal engagement came when I was in the 9th grade, and my parents volunteered me to be one of 10 students that integrated Atlanta Public Schools. And it was a horrible experience. Every day I would come home crying, please don't let me go back. I really want to go back to my home school. And my mother would look me in the eye and say to me every single day, Deborah, this is not about you. This is about something bigger than you. And so this informed my whole life choices in terms of the work that I've taken on, the organizations I've been in, the causes I've advocated for. And all of this seems to come together here, where I am now with you. So thank you.
Of course, up to this point, you really have had quite a successful career. And I'm wondering, with that, what was the biggest driver in your desire to come to the ACLU right here, right now?
Well, one of the things is, as a lifelong social activist, I've always known and supported the work and partnered with the ACLU on many issues. However, the ACLU of Colorado is exemplary in terms of your track record. I mean, hearing the things that Stephen just read that you were able to accomplish last year, knowing the trajectory that we now have to really move the needle forward in positive ways. All of that came into the mix of sense, like why I wanted to be in this place at this time. But I would tell you, Scotty, meeting you, members of the board, hearing and seeing and feeling your deep commitment to this mission. And then when I met the staff, and they're exemplary in terms of their skills, their passion, their execution strategies. So that really was the deciding factor, people that I would be working with in this endeavor.
Great. And we've heard about some of the past and current successes of the ACLU of Colorado. And now that you've officially arrived, I was hoping you could tell us your vision about the organization and affiliate in both the near and far future.
I really am pleased to be here at this moment in our history because last year, the lesson from last year is that we saw all of the fissures of social and racial injustices were exposed. They came to the surface. We couldn't ignore them anymore. They were out there for us to see. And so now that we know that they're there, we have the imperative to really begin to shine a light on them, to begin having conversations and educating ourselves of why they occurred and what we need to do to dismantling them. And so this is the time to do this work. I mean, for instance, the work that ACLU's done, like around decriminalizing being homeless, for instance, puts us squarely into the mental health and affordability housing conversation. The fact that the de-escalation of populations in the jail is an issue that now we need to talk about. What are those social conditions that causes people to be ensnared in the criminal justice system, but more importantly, what it is that we can do to prevent it by putting in the systems and policies and programs in place that prevents it from happening in the first place. So I'm really interested in partnering with those of you in this call and other coalition members and new ones on how we work together to actualize what Dr. Martin Luther King would say, the beloved community. How do we actually actualize that in the state of Colorado?
Great, thank you. Can you speak to specific issues that our affiliate will address in the next 6 to 12 months, let's say?
Mm-hmm. And I really do thank the staff for their patience in really getting me up to speed on what they are and giving me all the background work and beginning to connect with those partners that's making it to happen. Certainly, reproductive rights is an essential issue for us to fight for, that right for all women to have access to reproductive health options. We have legislation already that has been passed out of the committee and now being considered in the Senate that would decrease the number of beds in juvenile detention and end cash bails for children. Many of you have read the news article just this week about the situation of this young man with a proven disability, documented disability, who was detained unlawfully by the police. And then his parents was slammed with a $25,000 bail. That cannot happen anymore. We have to stop that. And certainly we will continue our work around depopulating the number of people in our jails and prisons, and really work to disrupt this horrific public policy that has had multi-generational harm to our communities. And immigration, now that we have policies in place that opens our borders, we now to ensure that once immigrants arrive, that they're safe and have fair treatment. And keeping in mind, though, Scotty, that all of these issues are intersectional. They're all signs of systemic racism, because at each and every one of them, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are disproportionately negatively impacted, which puts us directly into the racial justice work that we're going to do to begin to dismantling systemic racism. So it's a big agenda, but now is the time to get started on it. Scotty, now you're on mute.
Unbelievable. I'm so sorry, everyone. I know that around the nation, there's been a lot of talk about environmental justice. And I'm curious, what does environmental justice mean to you? And what support do you and the affiliate need to achieve this goal?
Thank you for that question. We can no longer ignore how our actions and inactions have to the earth has provided irreparable harm and continues to do so. And frankly, I believe that the word environmental justice can be triggering because it pulls us into these conversations that pitting against reducing our harm to the planet against harming the economy. I prefer to use the term environmental racism because, again, the data is clear that Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people are faced horrific chronic health conditions directly because of their living and working in unsafe environmental conditions. So I see this as being repositioned as a public health position and a racial injustice issue, which starts then with providing education and awareness on how it happens, beginning to collect stories of our neighbors who are directly impacted by these unsafe communities. And then what we do best is promoting effective public policy and holding those perpetrators accountable. So in terms of the resources that we need, we certainly need more collaborative partnerships in this, as well as dedicated monetary resources so that we can advance the work.
We'll come back to a couple of your points later on in the conversation. But for now, I know that in recent years, the ACLU, has evolved into an organization that uses an integrated advocacy model to achieve social justice. How does each department complement one another to advance the cause of the organization? Additionally, from a resources standpoint, can you talk about what philosophy or thoughts you have on how you think resources should be allocated between policy, advocacy, public education, community engagement, communications, and litigation, let's say?
I'm glad this question came up because it really does speak to, again, why I decided to become a part of the ACLU family is because of this integration of the wings of the organization. And so what we know now from data, from research, from lived experiences, that there are essentially 5 steps to social change. The first one is to increase awareness that the problem exists. The second one is define what is the injustice of this. Number 3 is to call for change in our behavior. 4 is public engagement to advance the public policy we want. And the 5th one, which is absolutely essential, is holding the line. And so how we are organized is that each one of our units are really focusing on bringing forth and moving us through those 5 steps. And they're essential and they have to be done in a coordinated way. And so in order to implement them, we have to have the resources to provide the public, provide the people and the funding to make sure that this happens and to ensure that those resources are applied based on the intended outcomes of our strategy. So resources would depend in short on the strategies that we're going to undertake.
To be able to achieve all that you mentioned in every aspect of the organization, it sounds like the ACLU of Colorado will need to be closely engaged with communities and organizations across the state. How will you form and/or strengthen those relationships?
I have been populating a conversation with the board and the staff about ACLU of Colorado running a time-bound campaign that essentially the purpose is to expand our table for justice, to expand those people who are sitting at our table. And we're going to start rolling it out next month. And everyone here, we want your active engagement in this. And what that would mean is a series of conversations and listening sessions with likely and unlikely partners who intersect with all of our issues and more, to hear what is important to you and what our mutual engagement may look like, and how we can begin to pull together these coalitions to begin to work. In order to build a more perfect union in Colorado, we need to invite everyone to the effort. And let's be frank, the ACLU has a lot of work to do around achieving racial parity in both our external and within our organization. And so we are committed that we're going to, in these conversations around expanding our table, ensure that our table is as diverse and as equitable and inclusive as possible, and it represents the people in the communities of our state. We can only be successful in our work and with our outcomes if we have the biggest table possible. And so now you're hearing our open invitation to invite you to join us, and you look forward to hearing more from us about this soon.
Along those lines, are there specific ways that you can name that folks on the call would be able to help engage in these activities?
Sure. So we have identified some categories, people we want to talk to, very expansive, from social justice groups to elected officials, to neighborhood organizations that do good work, to multi-faith communities, to the business and civic sector. And so those of you on the call who your lives are interconnected along those various sectors, we'll be reaching out to you and asking you to give us your ideas, suggestions, and contacts who we should invite to be a part of the table. And we don't want to be the one hosting these conversations singly. We want to partner with you. We would like for you to host conversations where it seems appropriate. And so I see this has been an all-encompassing joint activity. And so again, we're looking forward to building a great collaboration, and you'll hear from us specifically how you can help soon.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for that, Deborah. You know, over the last several months, you and I have had the opportunity to have several discussions on these things, and I want to make sure that the audience members get a chance to ask you questions and pick your brain, as I say in my world. And with that, I will ask the first question, then pass the mic back to Stephen to help facilitate a Q&A. With that, the first question that has come from the audience: I've been a supporter of the ACLU for at least 60 years. As I see it, it is an advocate for those whose rights have been trespassed upon, both individually and corporately. And I am very concerned with the huge divide between the left and the right in this nation. I've learned about and am studying to be a moderator for the Braver Angels. It is an organization that is developing ways of having civil, healing, and consensus-building conversations across the red-blue divide. I'm wondering if you see a role for the ACLU in helping to bridge the divide, and if so, what might that look like?
But first, I want to thank you for your 60 years of engagement with ACLU and in that mutual struggle for justice. That's commendable. And you're right. Unfortunately, we live in this era of political strife. You know, there's these left-right destinations that have become trigger words, and civil debate has been replaced by mudslinging, which has led to a lot of mental and physical harm. While the ACLU's history is protecting freedom of speech and assembly, we can also promote integrity among adversaries. So I think that this is an example of how we can join this organization and others to begin to host these intelligent dialogues. So it's not just those of us who are, and intentionally ensure it's not just those of us who have a singular point of view or part of the conversation, but also disparate opinions and model what it looks like. I heard Dr. Fossey say one time that there may be a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts about an issue, but there's only one fact. And I think if we start from identifying those facts and then begin to build meaningful conversations around the fact, that may be a strategy to get us there. So I'm very interested in your organization, the Brave Angel Project, and I want to learn more. So I'll definitely be in touch with you.
And with that, Stephen, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you so much. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I'm actually going to take two questions because they're related. So the first is, Georgia and other Republican-controlled states are trying to pass laws to suppress the vote. We need everybody to fight back to protect our democracy. How is ACLU of Colorado going to fight back these voter suppression laws? And then there's a related question. What is your strategy regarding protecting and expanding voting rights?
You know, Colorado certainly has a gold standard in terms of your voting methodology, and the ACLU and others have ensured that some of the horrible voter repression, suppression efforts that are taking place in Georgia and other states have been held at bay. I think what we can do at this point is to, number one, start with voter education. I teach a political science class. I used to teach a political science class at Georgia State University. And one of my first conversations with my students was, tell me all the ways that politics impact your life. Majority of them said it didn't. And I was astounded, you know, and I would say, well, number one, you go to a state school. How did you get here? Did you go on the government paved highway, or did you take the government funding public transportation? So we need to really talk to people about what being a citizen is in the United States and how our fundamental, most important role as a citizen is to vote. So voter education and connecting it to the everyday outcomes of our lives is something that the ACLU and others can really work throughout the state to put in place.
Let me chime in and add a little bit. I will add that the ACLU, our partner affiliates all across the country, are thoroughly engaged in fighting to defeat these laws that have been proposed all across the country. Certainly, as Deborah mentioned, Colorado is in very good shape. We have some of the best election laws and practices in the country, but we're not immune. We have seen a number of bills introduced already this legislative session to roll back all of the progress that we have made in improving our voting our voting access and voting systems. We're in a good shape to defeat all those, so we're okay in Colorado. But yes, we are concerned about this and fighting hard all across the country. Another question, Deborah, could you again list your 5 steps for social change?
Oh, okay. And actually, when we talk about it in terms of shifts. So it means that these shifts have to happen in society in order to make it come about. And the first one is a shift in awareness for people to become aware that this is an injustice that's taking place. For instance, my work with in ending child sex trafficking began with the fact that people did not know that there were actually young children within the United States who were being sexually exploited. So we had to first shift the awareness that yes, this is happening. So that's the first step. The second one is to put it in an injustice, in a human rights, social injustice lens. And that is how you begin to tell them why it is wrong, that exploiting children is not only harmful to the long-term life of that child, it opens up a lot of trauma and lifelong issues. So to shift it in terms of what the issues and what the injustice is. The third one is to shift the behavior of things, and so how people react to things. In our case, we had to get judges and others to stop arrests of supporting children being in detention, and for the child welfare assistant to understand that these were exploited children and they needed services and not harm. The last one is the definition of it. So what would it look like? What are we going to call this new thing? So let's give it a new name. For instance, a mantra that came out of the Black Lives Matter movement was defund the police, which is very triggering. Whereas what does that look like when we shift resources for productive communities and making people whole versus punitive? So to, again, begin to define what the world would look like. The next one is the public policy change. It doesn't become a step towards social change unless you have a policy or a law. And the policy could be within an organization or institution. There's public policy and there's also the other policies in our institutions that govern our lives. So putting that policy in place. And the one thing that those of us who have seen, particularly those of us who are, for instance, Stephen, in the voting rights movement, I've seen the harm in is not holding the line. That once we achieve the right, we have got to hold the line to ensure that it maintains. And so as you see, the ACLU is perfectly positioned in each one of those. But those steps you can apply to any social change situation.
We have another question. Someone did not hear, Deborah, your sort of reference to reproductive rights. Could you speak a little bit? We've been very strong in that in the past. Could you speak again about our work on reproductive rights and the continued work in that area?
Sure. The ACLU believes that a woman has a fundamental right to have access to reproductive health services according to what she views is best for her life and her destiny. And so it's important. And so again, you all have had some great public policy. You had a wonderful, a great amendment on the ballot. So now we have to make sure that we are removing all barriers, again, by making it the right that this occurs and it's not peeled off or broken down in certain categories. It has to be an overarching right. So that's the work that I know that we've already started doing that. in this legislative session.
So Deborah, as a new leader in the ACLU family and the Colorado community, where do you see opportunities for growth in the work of the ACLU of Colorado?
Okay, how much time do we have?
Plenty.
You know, again, because it's all intersectional, the big work, the big body of work is around racial justice. Once we begin to look at racial justice systemically versus on individual behaviors, but begin to look at it as a systemic issue and why those issues have been put in place, and then what needs to happen to not only to dismantle them, but what needs to be put in place to replace them. You know, an example around the affordable housing piece, for instance, is that we have, before we can address affordable housing, we have to address the fact that people of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are very much more likely to be either homeless, live in substandard housing, or housing insecure. So if we begin to look at that through a systemic racism lens, then we can put in place things such as, you know, all those solutions that I know some communities in Colorado are already working toward. And then once we know that they work, that we begin to replicate them. So that's the key right there. That I feel is for us to really look at everything we do through a racial justice lens. And once we dismantle that, then everything else will pull into place. As long as we chip around the edges and don't address the racial justice piece, we'll be having this conversation 5-10 years from now.
Deborah, what do you see as the biggest differences between seeking racial and social justice in Georgia and in Colorado?
Well, a couple of things. One of the biggest differences is in Georgia, we have a much larger population of Blacks than Colorado does. So therefore, we're able to organize ourselves and our advocates to really push forth and to join us and change. I mean, that's how we were able to elect 2 Democratic senators from Georgia, was because it was felt that the Republican agenda was going to be very harmful to communities, Black communities specifically. And so therefore we had to make the case to get advocates to join us in that effort. Now, and that is also the connector to Colorado, because there's a lot, Blacks are a lot fewer in percentage-wise in this state. It's really important for us to educate and build advocates with us. So one of them is in Georgia, it was the work to prevent something from happening, whereas in Colorado, it's the work that we can move forward, the positive to happen. The other thing about doing work is that Georgia has had the political decisions that have been made in Georgia were not proactive in terms of addressing the root causes and the needs of the people. For instance, Georgia never had a mandated mask policy, which meant that the numbers for COVID were high and continue to be high. And those numbers continued to be impacted people of color. Whereas in Colorado, there is, I believe, and you know, and we'll see, I don't think you'll prove me wrong, is that you do take facts and science and data to come from decisions, and they are made for the best interest of the whole versus through a particular political lens. So those are just 2 ways that I view the nuances and the difference, but also the opportunities.
How can the ACLU support community leadership in programming regarding alternatives to policing and reallocation of portions of public safety funding?
I think the part of that answer is in that very first sentence, the support community leadership. Those who with the lived experience and direct experience in any situation are the experts. It is not, I'm not the expert, ACLU is not the expert, it's the expert, the people who have the real expertise are the people who are living it. And so for us to be engaged in active listening sessions, to be engaged in conversations and supporting the direction that the communities want. So if once we understand what they're on, having them, allowing them to set the priorities, and we become an accelerator of it, if you will. And so there's a very important role that we can play because we have the privilege of being able to connect a lot of external resources, people and funding resources, but it really has to be based on community leadership and community preferences and priorities.
So Deborah, in this time of working remotely, how do you build a staff and board team in this period?
You know, the good news is that technology in this instance became a friend versus a frustration. However, before I get to that point, we can't dismiss the fact that people, again, were disproportionately impacted by not having access to internet and the devices to do their work, technology. So that's an advocacy area right there for us to put on our agenda, to layer the access opportunities. However, in that we are only able to use the technology to communicate, I think in some ways it means that we can, and we've already started this, have conversations, more conversations about why we do this work, what's important to us, how we are, and looking at it in terms of who we are as whole people, you know, people outside of just our work and our brain, but how our families are doing, how are we feeling about it, how can we support you, what is it that you need. So I think having that ongoing dialogue among staff, especially, is absolutely essential. And I think, frankly, Stephen, under your leadership, the staff at ACLU Colorado has done an amazing job in staying connected and validating each other. And so it's very impressive. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you for that. It's been a crazy year.
Well, you have anything to add to that since you've done a good job? Any other advice you can give?
What I think is important is that you provide a variety of ways for people to connect, in individual meetings, one-on-one, and try to stay accessible. Some people prefer the phone call, some people prefer texting. I think I have to be really flexible and try to set up channels that work for everybody. And that it's a challenge, but I think that's, I think we're all adjusting pretty well, even though it's been a difficult period, so.
Yeah, it's a process for sure.
Process, yes. So we have a question from someone who was a board member of the New York affiliate some years ago, and had a question about the board and staff partnership in setting priorities for the organization. And the question really was Deborah, what do you see are the priorities for the ACLU of Colorado moving forward?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because one of the board and I, when we were having conversations about my coming on board, one of the first things we agreed that we would begin is a strategic planning process, because even if we had an active strategic plan, this past year has completely put it all on the back burner. It's no longer relevant to the lives we're living. So the first step, I think, is determining what our vision is during this period of time. By the next 3 years, we want to achieve X, Y, and Z. And once we put what I call the destination out there, and then what are the strategies and tactics that's going to get us there, and putting in a process for evaluating it as we go, what's working, what's not working, what needs to be adjusted, so it becomes a fluid document versus a static document. And so So I can't tell you what the priorities are because that's something that we're going to determine collectively. But I know that any of them are going to be rooted in our very consistent and persistent vision of protecting civil liberties and rights for all people.
So given the composition of the US Supreme Court, many believe that state legislatures and state courts will be increasingly important in the struggle for civil rights and civil liberties. Do you agree? And if so, what opportunities do you see in Colorado? I'm happy to chime in on this one too, if you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know enough about it to answer that question intelligently. Stephen, your thoughts?
So I'll take a stab at it, and not being an attorney, I can only use, but I can say that this has been a live conversation within the organization for quite a while. And yes, absolutely, we have been for some years and will continue to look at opportunities to pursue changes through state law and state courts, because you're right, the federal courts have tilted away from being friendly towards civil rights and civil liberties. So we have been moving in that direction for some years now, and will continue to. So yes. A question about how do we see the ACLU continuing to work on LGBTQ issues moving forward? And again, Deborah, I'm happy to help with that if you'd like.
Well, I was going to say the commitment continues and it deepens because to use the example I've been using throughout this conversation is that LGBTQ communities and people of color and Black peoples and trans people are really disproportionately impacted by this. And so it's absolutely important that we remain vigilant in it. So Stephen, what are some specific things?
Sure. So I think the amazing progress that has been made over the last couple of decades for LGBTQ rights, the one area where there is still a tremendous amount of work to do, and in fact, a lot of work currently happening across the country, is on rights for transgender individuals. And currently we're seeing all kinds of attacks across the country on trans individuals. Some of them are related to trans individuals participating in sports activities in schools and universities. That's a big one. So that is, in terms of LGBTQ rights, probably the largest area where there is still a tremendous amount of work to do to secure and protect rights of trans individuals. Of course, we are always facing a number of efforts to allow discrimination against LGBTQ individuals, sort of a license to discriminate based on religious beliefs. We've been fighting that for a number of years. That's sort of an ongoing fight as well. So those are, I think, the sort of two big areas where we continue to have lots of work to do. So it's a little bit of a long question. I mean, let me read it because I think there's an interesting question at the end. So this is from Richard, and he says, I share your focus on getting to the facts at the root of an issue. In the last few years, I've become aware that many folks are stuck in the emotional aspect and can't be reached attempting to establish the facts. How can we get to facts with the millions of folks who think that the election was stolen, et cetera?
You know, I've learned based on my lived experience in that one can't, at some point you have to pivot away from the distraction of the issue and move toward the solution. And, I'm not sure that there's anything we can do to shift people's beliefs, their opinions about the outcome of the election. But I do know that there are conversations that we can have to talk about what democracy looks like, how to make it participatory democracy, the importance of people's engagement in it, and what does equitable voting look like, and the connection between providing access to actually advancing democracy, not just as a way of being punitive and taking the rights away. So I feel that what the ACLU can do with our partners is begin having these conversations around education, solution building, and hopefully that we will begin to see that shift that I've talked about in terms of people's awareness and behavior that they once again become willing to all work together toward our shared interests versus what they view as being a very limited time, limited disadvantage or injustice. Stephen, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. I have a couple questions left. It's a question from Mark. Is one solution regarding civic engagement and fighting misinformation and media literacy? And how can the ACLU support civics and media education?
I love that question because there are others who are also interested in this, and there are some curriculum that is that's being developed, and certainly with the universities that we have here in Colorado, I'm sure that we can find some partners that can help us, if there's not already, to create one that can be culturally sensitive and inclusive, that ACLU with our partners can begin to implement. As I said earlier, I see this as an essential piece of ensuring that the agenda of upholding the Bill of Rights of the United States continues by educating people on what democracy looks like and what our active engagement is. So I'm very much looking forward to working with those of you who are also interested in this so we can start that process of widespread community education.
Deborah, is your plan to continue to work, you're familiar with your work on human trafficking. Do you plan to continue to help traffic people at the ACLU? Is that one question?
Okay. Ending not necessarily child, ending labor and sexual exploitation is a concern of all of us. And it is, and so again, for us to think about it in terms of broadly. So part of it, we think about, we have an image about what trafficking looks like, which does not fit the reality. So for instance, people who are vulnerable to being exploited generally are poor. They live in unsafe conditions. And so that becomes an issue that if we could eradicate that, advance good public education, we would eliminate the antecedents for someone being trafficked within the United States. The other thing is we need to hold people accountable who are the perpetrators of human trafficking. There's been a lot of attention put on traffickers and rescuing victims, but I happened to open one of the first safe houses in this country 20 years ago. And I am just stunned that we still need to have safe houses because we're not holding those perpetrators. And that means those who are causing the demand for exploited labor and sex. That's where our attention, from a criminal justice perspective, that's where our attention needs to be placed. And so, yes, we'll continue to work on that area because it's deeply entwined in the intersection of our racial justice work, and all of the other work that we're doing around access to rights. And for us to begin to not keep it siloed, but to see how it is part of the ongoing right of racial and social justice.
And second question from that same individual, Deborah, do you intend on fighting against discrimination of disabled individuals?
Absolutely. That is absolutely essential. And oftentimes people who are living with disabilities, some that we can see and one that we don't see, we've been terrible advocates for them. We have almost placed the onus on them to fight for their rights, whereas all of our responsibility to ensure that as citizens and as our neighbors, that they have the access to the same kind of opportunities that each of us want. And so that very much is a part of, when you think again as an intersectional agenda, ensuring that people living with disabilities receive their rights and that we all view how we are all in part of that, ensuring that it happens is very much a part of the agenda.
Okay, we have one more question, and it's a fantastic one to maybe end, I don't necessarily end, but a great one for now. How can ACLU members, friends, and coalition partners best support you as you begin your work as executive director? And what do you need from us writ large?
I love that question. Thank you very much for asking that. The first thing is that I want to get to know you, know people that you work with, that you affiliate with, that you collaborate with. And part of having these listening sessions and broad conversations is a way to get that done. I also want you to invite me to be a part of your meetings. There's an opportunity that I could present about the work that we're doing at the ACLU. Please invite me to do that. I'm very much interested in mentoring the next generation of social change agents. So young people who are on this call, or those of you who work with young people, I would like to hear how we can make that, embed that in our work, because we need the next generation that will come behind me and others to do this important work. So in short, suggestions, invitations, and commitment to work with us as we begin to figure out what our partnership opportunities will be. That is the best question. Thank you.
Well, I think that about wraps it up. We have a few minutes. I don't know if Scotty or Deborah, if you wanted to say any final wrap-up words.
I do, and then I'll turn it over to Scotty. One is that first I want to thank you for the support that you already give to the ACLU, and ask particularly in this transition year as we move forward our agenda and I become fully implanted in the role, that you all will certainly consider providing support in terms of time, getting the word out about the work that we're doing, providing financial resources to support the work that we're doing, and connecting us to ways that we can work collectively on items, on issues that are important to us. So all of that, we need your active engagement now. And I thank you for considering it, and look forward to talking with each of you more about it later. Scotty?
And I just want to thank everyone for attending this Q&A info session, getting to know Deborah. I encourage you all to reach out to her and get to know her more, and partner up with her and with the organization and the affiliates so we can advance social justice for everyone. Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.